Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, if I could certainly praise my colleague for his eloquence and for his passion and say how right he is. I have a statement I'd like to put in the record, but I simply at this point, as I see the senior senator from New Jersey here, commend him for his brilliance and for his dedication. And I thank my colleagues for allowing me to speak. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I want to commend my colleague from New Jersey for an eloquent and soaring speech that speaks to the collective aspirations that we should have in this body on behalf of the collective nation that we represent. And I am not at all surprised at Senator Booker's ability to relate to this body the lives of people from New Jersey and across the country who depend upon us to respond to them in their times of need, and to remind us of the greater nature of what we should stand for as an institution and on behalf of this country. And he did it, I think, with such aplomb, and he did it with such a passion and intensity, and at the same time with such sincerity that I think it is an excellent beginning to what will be a very long series of remarks to the Senate on critical issues that will both inform us and at the same time remind us of the high calling for which we are all brought to the Senate. I just want to take one moment to add on to what Senator Booker said, specifically on the topic for which he ultimately drove, and that is this question of unemployment. And I want to relate one story. I see the senator from Utah is up, so I'm just going to relate one story and ask the rest of my remarks be included in the record. But it speaks
without objection.
But it speaks to the very heart of what Senator Booker was conveying here. I get thousands of letters from people who depend on their meager unemployment benefits to avert complete economic disaster while they desperately look for work. And as Senator Booker said, these people are not lazy. They're not looking for a handout. They just want a job, any job. And I want to talk about one constituent in particular, Noelle from Atlantic County, who described herself as, quote, a middle-aged, unemployed single mother trying to raise two sons to be successfully contributing members of our society. She said in her letter that after her marriage ended, quote, I didn't shrug my shoulders and give up, even though the system said I didn't qualify for assistance. I took care of my children in my home to pay the bills and avoid child care costs. In 2000, when my children were of school age, I found a minimum wage seasonal job and worked hard to become a permanent employee. I worked even harder to rise up in the organization and become a respected manager. And when that company went bankrupt in 2009, I found another job, within 2 weeks taking a large pay cut and making far less than I would have made on unemployment. I stayed with that company for 4 years until I was laid off in July of 2013. Once again, I didn't shrug my shoulders and give up. For the following 26 weeks, I sought employment. I have joined every employment website I could find and applied for any job remotely within my limited job skills. Unfortunately, the responses I've gotten have not been encouraging. 13 years of retail experience, including 9 years of management experience, translates into few opportunities. No one will consider me for any entry-level positions based on my previous experience. And she closed in saying, no, I do not think unemployment should be a way of life. No, I do not think you can be unemployed and disabled. No, I do not think 3 million unemployed Americans are going to find jobs in 26 weeks. So she's right. And these are the type of Americans that Senator Booker was talking about, and this is why the Senate should act. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Utah.
Mr. President, we're better than this. This farm bill is a monument to every dysfunction Washington indulges, to bend our policies and twist our economy to benefit itself at the expense of the American people. The top-line talking point among defenders of this bill is the word compromise. The Farm Bill, we're told, may be imperfect, but it's a compromise we can all live with. They said negotiators from both houses and both political parties came together and hammered out a deal. They said this is just how you have to act to get things done in Washington. There is, of course, some truth to this, but it's more of a half-truth. There absolutely is compromise in this 1,000-page, trillion-dollar mess. But it's not a compromise between House Republicans and Senate Democrats. No, it's collusion between both parties against the American people. It benefits special interests at the expense of national interest. This bill does not demonstrate how to do things in Washington, but it instead demonstrates how to do things for Washington. The final product before us is not just a legislative vehicle. It's a legislative getaway car. And what did they get away with? Well, the Farm Bill is really two bills. One that spends about $200 billion to subsidize the agriculture industry, and another that spends $750 billion on the public assistance program, previously known as food stamps. The Farm Bill is thus a beltway marriage of convenience between welfare and corporate welfare, ensuring the passage of both while preventing reform in either. Instead, Congress broke out the neck bolts and sutures and put Frankenstein's monster back together. This was the year the Farm Bill was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be the year when we would finally split the bill into its logical component pieces and would subject them both to overdue scrutiny and reform. This was the year we might have strengthened the food stamp program with work and other requirements for able-bodied adults to help transition beneficiaries into full-time jobs. This was the year we might have added an asset test to make sure wealthy Americans with large personal bank accounts were no longer eligible for food stamps. But those reforms aren't there. Those reforms aren't here, not in this bill. Under this legislation, the food stamp program is not really reformed. It's just expanded. Once again, the give and take of compromise in Congress boils down to the American people give and Washington takes. Yet, if anything, Mr. President, the other side of this bill is even worse. Not only did the conference committee fail to reform programs subsidizing agriculture businesses, the conference committee removed many of the few improvements the House and Senate tried to include in the first place. For instance, the original Senate bill, for all its faults, included a novel provision to limit farm subsidies to actual farms, actual farmers. The Senate bill was also going to phase out crop insurance subsidies for wealthy Americans with an annual income of more than $750,000. Farmers who made $750,000 a year, after all, should not need taxpayer assistance to keep their farms afloat. The House bill included a transparency reform requiring members of Congress to disclose any subsidies they personally receive under the crop insurance programs. Yet all of the above reforms mysteriously disappeared from the final legislation now before us. And it's not like the Farm Bill was a paragon of accountability and fairness to begin with. Agricultural policy follows a troubling trend in Washington, using raw political power to twist public policy against the American people, to profit political and corporate insiders. For instance, under this legislation, the federal government will continue to force taxpayers to subsidize sugar companies, both in the law and in the grocery store. The bill maintains the so-called dairy cliff, keeping dairy policy temporary. This will create an artificial crisis the next time we take up a farm bill, which will once again undermine thoughtful debate and reform. Perhaps of all the shiny ornaments hung on this special interest Christmas tree, the shiniest may be the actual cronyist handout to the Christmas tree industry itself. Under this farm bill, small independent Christmas tree farmers will now be required to pay a special tax to a government-created organization controlled by larger corporate producers, like some medieval tribute to feudal lords. These costs will, of course, be passed on to working families, and so every December, Washington will, in effect, rob the Cratchits to pay Mr. Scrooge and his lobbyists in Washington. And yet, Mr. President, even all this is squeaky clean legislating compared to this farm bill's most offensive feature, its bullying, disenfranchising shakedown of the American West. Most Americans who live east of the Mississippi have no idea that most of the land west of the Great River is owned by the federal government. Now, I don't mean national parks, protected wilderness, national monuments, and the like. We've got a lot of those, and we love them. But that's a fraction of the land that I'm talking about. I'm just talking about garden variety land, the kind that is privately owned in every neighborhood and community across the country. More than 50% of all the land west of the Mississippi River is controlled by a federal bureaucracy, and it cannot be developed. No homes, no businesses, no communities or community centers, no farms or farmers markets, no hospitals or colleges or schools, no Little League fields, no playgrounds, nothing. In my own state, it's 63% of the land. In Daggett County, it's 81%. In Wayne County, it's 85%. In Garfield County, it's 90%. 90% of the land in Garfield County isn't theirs. In communities like these, financing local government is a huge challenge. There, like in the East, local government is funded primarily by property taxes. But in counties and towns where the federal government owns 70, 80, or even 90% of the land, there simply isn't enough private property to tax to fund basic local services. Another sheriff's deputy to police the streets, another truck or ambulance to save their lives and protect property from fires, another teacher to educate their children. To compensate local governments for the tax revenue that Washington unfairly denies them, Congress created, as only Congress could, the PILT program. PILT stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. Now, under PILT, Congress sends a few cents on the dollar out west every year to make up for lost property taxes. There's no guaranteed amount. Washington just sends what Washington feels like sending. Local governments across the western United States, and especially in counties like Garfield, Daggett, and Wayne County, Utah, completely depend on Congress making good on this promise. Given this situation, there are three possible courses of congressional action. First, Congress could do the right thing and transfer the land to the states that want it. Second, Congress could compromise and fully compensate Western communities for the growth and opportunity current law denies them. But in this bill, it's neither. Congress instead chooses option 3, lording its power over Western communities to extort political concessions from them, like some 2-bit protection racket. That's a nice fire department you got there, Congress effectively says to many Western communities. Nice school your kids have. It'd be a shame if anything would happen to it. These states and these communities are looking for nothing more than certainty and equality under the law. Yet Congress treats these not as rights to be protected, but as vulnerabilities to be shamelessly exploited. I've been on the phone with county commissioners for weeks who feel that they have no choice but to support a policy that they know doesn't work. This bill takes away their ability to plan and budget with certainty and forces them to come back to Congress hat in hand every year. County commissioners know that's no way to run a community. I share their frustration, and I applaud their commitment to their neighbors and their communities. I'm convinced that in the long run, the best way to protect these communities is to find a real, permanent solution, one that gives them the certainty and the equality under the law that they deserve. My vote against the Farm Bill will be a vote to rescue Utahns from second-class citizenship and local communities in my state from permanent dependence on the whims of faraway politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Mr. President, for all the talk we hear in this chamber about inequality, we nonetheless seem oblivious to its causes. This bill and thousands of other bills, laws, and regulations like it are themselves the root cause of our shortage of opportunity in America today. The end result of this legislation will be to disenfranchise and extort the American people, to benefit special interests, to enrich the well-connected at the expense of the disconnected. And the true cost of that transaction, just another forced deposit and withdrawal from Washington's dysfunctional favor bank, is a lot more than $956 billion. The true cost of this kind of unequal cronyist policymaking is the trust of the American people in the legitimacy of our political institutions, in the fairness of our economy, and in the good faith of their countrymen. Our constitutional republic, our free enterprise economy, and our voluntary civil society depend absolutely on the equality of all Americans under the law, the equality of all citizens' opportunity to pursue happiness in their own communities, according to their own values, each on a level playing field with everyone else. This legislation dangerously subverts that principle and mocks any patriot who still holds it dear. All Americans may be equal, but as George Orwell might put it if he were here today, under the Farm Bill, some Americans are simply more equal than others. I will not be part of it, and I encourage my colleagues to recognize that there is another way. There is a better way, a new approach that remembers what and who we're supposed to really stand for. What we're supposed to stand for is deliberation, open debate, and transparent amendment on this floor, in this chamber. These programs should not be coupled to shield them from scrutiny and protect them from reform. If we need food stamps to fight poverty and farm subsidies to maintain our food supply, let those programs stand on their own merits or not at all. Furthermore, the land out west is not going anywhere. This should be an opportunity for us to bring our people together, not turn our regions against each other and turn the right to local government into a dangerous political football. It's time to have a serious debate about a permanent solution to federally owned lands that can improve economic opportunity and mobility while reducing the national debt and deficit. And all the evidence in this Farm Bill to the contrary, I believe we are capable of finding such a solution. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Hawaii.
Senator Booker, congratulations on your very eloquent maiden speech. It's great to have you with us. And I want to thank Senator Booker also for calling upon the better angels in all of us to do the right thing. Opportunity and fairness for all are not just empty words. They are words to live by and words to live up to. So today I rise to add my support for extending unemployment benefits to those among us who need and deserve this lifeline. In December, over 2,000 Hawaii workers lost their unemployment benefits. Since then, about 250 more Hawaii workers are losing their benefits every week. In 2008, our country was plunged into the deepest economic crisis since the Great Depression. Many lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Many are still unemployed. Since 2008, unemployment benefits have kept over 11 million people out of poverty. Unemployed workers spend their benefits immediately on food and other necessities. Unemployment benefits go immediately into the local economy. Every dollar of spending on unemployment benefits generates almost $1.60 in local economic activity. But this isn't just about numbers. For people struggling to find work, emergency unemployment insurance is a vital safety net. It can mean the difference between being able to get back on your feet or falling into poverty. These programs provide real hope and real opportunity for people. I know this because I've lived it. My mother raised 3 children by herself as a single parent. Most of us have relied upon or know families who have used the earned unemployment assistance they paid for. And when my mother lost her job through no fault of her own, her unemployment checks went for rent and putting food on the table for her 3 children while she searched for work. So I know the anxiety when the family breadwinner loses her job, when every dime makes a difference. Those who say people on unemployment are lazy or don't want to work are insulting and injuring millions of Americans about whom nothing could be further from the truth. High unemployment particularly hurts women. Among female heads of households, the U.S. unemployment rate was 8.7% in December. That's 2 points higher than the 6.7% unemployment rate for the nation as a whole. And neither one of these statistics takes into account workers who have given up looking for work. We should support a short-term extension of unemployment benefits while Congress works on a needed longer-term bill. Last Friday, President Obama announced some new efforts to support the long-term unemployed. He gathered over 300 companies who have signed onto a set of best practices for recruiting and hiring unemployed, especially those long-term unemployed, to prevent discrimination against these Americans. The federal government will lead by example in a new presidential memorandum to improve its own recruiting and hiring of long-term unemployed people. Congress can do its part by updating and strengthening job training programs like through the Workforce Investment Act, I hope, which we will take up later this year. For right now, millions of families are counting on us to extend a vital lifeline to them. I urge my colleagues to support extending unemployment benefits. And I yield back.
The senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that detailees Nona McCoy and Kevin Batty, I apologize if I've mispronounced that last name, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the consideration of the conference report to accompany H.R. 2642, the Farm Bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise this evening to discuss the Agriculture Act of 2014, the Farm Bill conference report. Now, this legislation has been delayed, Mr. President, over 2.5 years, weighing the entire time on the minds and farmers and ranchers all across the country. Last Tuesday, I came to the floor to explain why I was the only senator on the Farm Bill conference not to sign the conference report and why I cannot, in good conscience, support this legislation. I am here today to go beyond my philosophical concerns with the direction of the legislation and will instead focus on how the 2000 Farm Bill will negatively impact agriculture in Kansas, my home state, as well as other states. Remember, the Farm Bill is not a simple reauthorization or continuation of our nation's farm and food programs. We have already done that once with a one-year extension of the 2008 bill. Instead, the legislation before us should be a wholesale rewrite of the programs and policies at the Department of Agriculture. When this bill is signed into law by the President and fully implemented, our producers will have to make choices among new safety net programs, new regulations, and new rules. Some of these choices will happen only once and will be irrevocable they cannot change for the next 5 years. This is a 5-year bill. We owe it to these farmers and ranchers, small business owners, as well as the next generation of producers, to get this legislation right. Unfortunately, I believe the Congress has missed the mark and that the conference report goes backwards toward protectionist subsidy programs instead of forward with innovative and responsible solutions. I'm not alone in that assessment, Mr. President. As reported by the Kansas City Star last Friday, January the 31st, all 4 Kansas House members voted no on what is arguably the single most important piece of federal legislation in Kansas. Now, that should grab everybody in America's attention. The entire House delegation from the wheat state was united in opposing this version of the Farm Bill. It is not that we do not appreciate agriculture or that the producers and their families in our state, it is entirely the opposite. We care so much that after 3 years of work, 3 years, we will not settle for supporting backwards legislation just to get something done. I call it a look in the rearview mirror. I understand that compromises were made, but I cannot support a bill that marches backwards toward producers making bad decisions based off of government subsidies, retaliation against our livestock producers, and once again, agriculture taking a disproportionate cut in spending compared, yes, to federal nutrition programs. When Chairperson Stabenow and I started the process of rewriting the Farm Bill, Kansas producers, regardless of what they planted, said over and over again their #1 priority and concern was the availability of crop insurance that protects in case of disaster. They were also fully aware that direct payments would no longer be available to them, and most were okay with that direction. However, Kansas producers did not ask for a continuation of a target price subsidy program, and they certainly did not want Congress to raise the target prices of all commodities. 2 years ago, in 2012, the Senate Agriculture Committee and the full Senate passed a farm bill that ended the countercyclical and commodity subsidy programs. If signed into law, the 2012 Senate Farm Bill would have taken the federal government and the Department of Agriculture out of the business of sending signals to producers, essentially telling them what crops to plant. Unfortunately, that reform was never fully realized. We have something called the new price loss coverage program that is contained in this conference report. It sets high fixed target prices and subsidies for all commodities and regions of the country. Last week, after the final details of the bill were released, I talked with a young producer near Dodge City, my hometown, that is a member of my voluntary Ag Advisory Council. I fondly refer to them as my Ag Posse. With the current cash price for wheat at the Dodge City grain elevator, around $6, and a target price guarantee for wheat set at $5.50 a bushel for the next 5 years, I asked this young, successful, and informed producer, what are you going to plant? What he told me should not surprise anyone in this body or anyone. He said, Pat, I'm going to plant wheat for the government subsidy. His answer only reinforces one of my biggest concerns with this conference report. When the federal government guarantees producers a subsidy, triggered off a target price, a reference price, a countercyclical price, whatever you want to call it, it always has and always will lead to planning and marketing distortions. So today, many producers have a college or advanced degree, often in business. They're going to evaluate the programs at the Department of Agriculture, make decisions that benefit their business's bottom line. So instead of planting grain sorghum or corn or soybeans, my friends in western Kansas already knows that he is going to plant the crop that he is guaranteed to receive the highest subsidy payment from the government, not from the market. In this case, wheat at $5.50 per bushel over corn with a target price of $3.70 a bushel. Now, I have yet to hear one explanation for why Congress is not only including target prices for corn, wheat, sorghum, soybeans, rice, peanuts, and barley, but raising and fixing their prices regardless of movements in the market. Now, Kansas is the best breadbasket of the world. So you might think that Kansas producers planting more wheat would be a good thing. However, simple economics and history demonstrate why this is such a dangerous road for the federal government to take. When all producers in Kansas and the rest of America have the same price guarantees and signals to plant wheat, no matter where you are, and the majority makes the business decision to follow subsidy signals instead of the market, over time there will undoubtedly be more production than demand, global or otherwise. We will have a surplus of wheat leading to lower wheat prices, and now this could normally be corrected by market signals. But with a fixed target price, farmers will continue to plant wheat for the subsidy, that subsidy guarantee, leading to further overproduction and even lower crop prices. We've been there before. We've been there before. That's why we tried to reform the program about several farm bills back. This cycle of overproduction, low grain prices, expensive support payments could eventually lead back to the days of mandatory quotas, happened before, and acreage allotments, happened before, known as set-asides, planning farmers not to grow anything. We don't need to go back to those days. Our producers in Kansas want none of that from their federal government. So besides having high fixed target prices, the new price loss coverage program sets the price guarantee so high that some are at or above the producer's cost of production. This would mean that the government is essentially subsidizing a producer so much that they are guaranteed to make a profit if they have a normal or average yield. And it gets worse. The early analysis that I have seen shows that target prices are high enough that rice, peanuts, and barley growers will receive a subsidy payment 75% of any given year, likely triggering a payment 4 out of the 5 next year's, the 4 out of the 5 years of this 5-year farm bill. Other commodities are not treated as favorably, with wheat prices likely to trigger a payment on average only 35% of the time, soybeans less than 15%. Now, what that tells me is that the new target price guarantees are set high enough for a few commodities to trigger subsidy payments with a high frequency. Folks, this is no longer a risk management tool or part of a responsible safety net. Make no mistake, the price loss coverage program is nothing more than a profit protection program from some of our commodity growers. Now, the lone commodity that has moved out of the price supports entirely was forced to after learning the lesson the hard way. In 2002, the World Trade Organization ruled against the United States for our cotton programs, including a decoupled target price subsidy. So in a settlement with Brazil, we have been paying their producers $147 million a year for damages, still paying them. As much as I disagree with the backwards direction of the commodity title, Kansas livestock producers may have more beef with this conference report. Kansas is in the heart of cattle country, and after multiple years of drought, 3 years of drought, livestock producers in my home state are waiting for disaster assistance that has been unnecessarily delayed for over 3 years. Yet, when taking the full conference report under consideration, both the Kansas Livestock Association, the Kansas Pork Association strongly oppose this bill. Why? In a letter sent to me by Jeff Sternberger, the president of the Kansas Livestock Association, he says, "We are deeply disappointed the report does not address our two priority issues, mandatory country of origin labeling, COOL, that's the acronym, and the Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, GIPSA, that's the acronym, both rules on cattle marketing." Now, mandatory country of origin labeling, or COOL, is a marketing program. However, our closest trading partners have found the practice anything but cool. Canada and Mexico are two of our biggest and historically strong markets for U.S. beef, pork, and chicken exports. In 2012 alone, Canada imported over $1 billion worth of U.S. beef, and Mexico imported over $800 million. If we do not come into compliance as required by the World Trade Organization, Canada and Mexico will retaliate against the United States. Now, without these markets, Kansas livestock producers will lose value on their products, negatively impacting one of the biggest drivers of our state's economy. Unfortunately, our efforts to fix COOL in the Farm Bill Conference Committee fell short, to the displeasure of our livestock producers and trading partners. The GIPSA rule on livestock marketing all should have been addressed in the final Farm Bill Conference report as well. The House version of the Farm Bill had strong provisions that would have let our livestock producers make their own marketing decisions instead of GIPSA, yet the provisions were left entirely out of the conference report with no explanation, no transparency, behind closed doors. Finally, I have to address a major inequality in the final conference report, and that is nutrition spending. When the Congressional Budget Office released their official estimate of the budgetary effects of this Agriculture Act, I was more than disappointed. According to their letter, CBO estimates the direct spending stemming from the programs authorized by the conference agreement would total $956 billion over the 2014 to 2023 period, of which $756 billion, almost 800, and by the way, that lower figure is a bet on the economy improving and people getting off the SNAP program, which would be good, certainly, but is certainly not certain. But the $756 billion would be for nutrition programs. Now, when you do the math, that means 79%, almost 80% of the total spending on the Farm Bill will go to nutrition programs, including SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The final compromise includes $8 billion in food stamp savings, mainly from tightening the low-income heating and assistance program, the infamous LIHEAP loophole. That's a good thing. States were gaming the system. I'm all for that. That amounts, however, to 1% reduction to nutrition spending, just 1% out of a $750 billion program, if you believe the projections. I think it's probably more toward $800 billion. The Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry recently released a statement within the headline, Deficit Reduction, the 2014 Farm Bill, showcasing the savings in this legislation. The release highlights the inequality between farm and food programs, and I quote, "Farm subsidy programs were cut far more significantly than any other area of the budget under the Agriculture Committee's jurisdiction. By comparison, farm subsidy programs were cut by 31%, nutrition programs were reduced 1%. You heard that right. Farmers, ranchers, farm broadcasters listening in, you heard that right. The Farm Bill once again prioritizes spending for food stamps over all other Department of Agriculture programs, including important conservation programs, including important research programs, including important rural development programs. Now, I'm fine with reducing farm subsidies like the Target Price program, but we should have included additional reforms to the nutritional programs, which we tried to do in several votes in a reasonable and responsible manner. Not touching anybody's benefits. Just look at the eligibility requirements. But the conference principals decided on the final compromise, again, behind closed doors. Now, while we all want to provide much-needed certainty to producers, goodness knows it's been a long, long time since we've had a farm bill in place, the conference missed an opportunity for greater and necessary reforms to our nation's farm programs, burdensome regulations on livestock producers, and federal nutrition programs. And after over 3 years of deliberation and disputes over the Farm Bill, our producers, our consumers, our taxpayers, our global trading partners expect and deserve more than found in this conference report. As a conferee, I did not sign the conference report last week. That didn't give me any pleasure. As a Kansan and a senator from a large agriculture state, I'm going to vote against this rear-view mirror legislation for all the reasons that I've itemized. Now, having said that, I do want to take a moment to personally thank Chairperson Stabenow and Chairman Lucas over in the House for their unwavering drive and perseverance to finalize a farm bill. It is one thing for me to stand up and to criticize it and find in my heart and my mind and in behalf of my Kansas producers to vote no, because I think that's the right vote, but I also know that they have endeavored, Chairman Stabenow and Chairman Lucas, to at least get a bill. It is a tall task to get a majority of the members of Congress to understand that the Farm Bill is not simply a bill that you pay off. I can remember that time when I was chairman of the committee over in the House, and I asked a colleague to help me on the Farm Bill. He said, "Why don't you just pay it?" indicating his broad knowledge of the Farm Bill at that particular time. So the Farm Bill is not simply a bill that you just pay off, but instead represents important legislation for both urban, rural states and districts, and the stability of the world, if you will, knowing that we have to feed 9 billion people in the next several decades. But at last the chairs have beaten all the odds and are on the verge of completing a very complicated and time-consuming undertaking, to say the least. I must also thank my colleagues and friends on the House and Senate Agriculture Committees for their knowledge, their expertise, their diverse perspectives on agriculture. And it's going to be really hard to imagine that many of the faces in the Senate Ag Committee room will not be there in person for the next Farm Bill, 5 years down the road. Senators Tom Harkin, Senator Saxby Chambliss, both of them will be sorely missed as they have both led the committee and their respective caucuses through previous farm bills. However, they will literally watch over the committee for years to come because their portraits are on the wall just hanging above us. I think their eyes move when we consider amendments. Senator Max Baucus will continue his service to the country as the next ambassador to China, but we will miss his advice and counsel in the committee. Finally, it is hard to describe the void that will be created with the departure of Senator Mike Johans of Nebraska. As the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, he has seen both sides of a farm bill, implementing one and writing another. Even though, Mr. President, Nebraska left the Big 12 for the Big 10, this K-State fan can admit that we will all miss having this champion for the Cornhusker State around. So although I will not vote for the Farm Bill conference report, I promise to all of Kansas agriculture that I fully appreciate the need for a Farm Bill, especially one that has been delayed for years. But while we need a Farm Bill, we do not need this Farm Bill. I truly respect the farmers and ranchers and everybody connected with agriculture, what you do as a profession for our economy and for global stability in a troubled and hungry world. I just wish the rest of this Senate would do the same thing. I will continue to work and to advocate and to champion agriculture on your behalf every single day. Mr. President, I yield back.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I want to commend the junior senator from New Jersey on his first speech on the Senate floor. brings a strong voice to the United States Senate. Today, he raises that voice for our friends and neighbors who need it, and I am proud to stand alongside him. Just 5 years ago, middle-class families got hammered by the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. These families didn't cause the crisis. They worked hard and played by the rules, but they ended up paying the price for Wall Street's wild risk-taking and Washington's failed oversight. People lost jobs, lost savings, lost homes. Far too many of them are still struggling. For these families, every dollar counts. An extra couple of $100s a week can keep food on the table or heat on during cold winter months. It can mean the difference between making the rent or mortgage payment and being out on the street. That's what emergency unemployment insurance is for, to give folks a little bit of help that they need to keep their heads above water while they search for a job. Unemployment insurance represents our commitment as a country that will pitch in when our friends and neighbors have fallen on rough times, knowing that they would do the same for us. So far, Republicans seem determined to break that commitment. Because of Republican filibusters, 1.6 million Americans and counting have lost access to unemployment insurance since the end of last year, including more than 60,000 people in Massachusetts. Their obstruction means that we cannot fulfill our commitment to the families that need it most. My Republican colleagues should be looking for a way to say yes. Yes to helping middle-class American families and their 2.3 million children who rely on unemployment insurance. But once again, they just want a way to say no. Extending unemployment insurance should be a simple matter. It happened 5 times during the Bush administration, and not once did Republicans demand that the costs be offset by cuts or revenue increases elsewhere. But the Republicans have insisted on a different standard this time, filibustering because the extension of benefits wasn't offset. Democrats thought this was wrong, but we compromised and we agreed to offset the cost. So did we have a deal? No. The Republicans refused to take yes for an answer and filibustered again. Why would Republicans block the extension of unemployment benefits? Some seem to believe that unemployment insurance is actually bad for struggling families. One Republican senator recently said that emergency unemployment insurance does a disservice to people because it causes them to, quote, become part of this perpetual unemployed group in our economy. Last year's Republican vice presidential nominee, Congressman Ryan, said that federal safety net programs like unemployment insurance are, quote, like a hammock which lulls able-bodied people into lives of complacency and dependency. This is an insult to hard-working people across this country, people who are doing their best and can't find a job. This is an insult to people like Terry, a 41-year-old resident of Gardner, Massachusetts, who lost her job last year. Here's what she wrote to me after Congress let the unemployment insurance program expire. My employer suddenly let me go, and I found myself unemployed for the first time since my very first part-time job at 15. I have been diligently looking for work, applying everywhere, but I haven't had any job offers. She writes that unemployment insurance is all we have. I'm already on the brink of losing my home. We are struggling to hang on to what very little we have. I know I'm one of 1.3 million faces, but I'm a face from near your home. I'm a face that never thought I'd be in this situation. I'm a face that needs the help of my government services that I have paid into for many, many years. I'm a face that has done everything I'm supposed to do, but I feel like I've fallen aside and no one sees me. I'm not an abuser of the system. I'm someone who really needs my government to be there for me now. Please see me. Terry isn't looking for a life of complacency and dependency. and she's not the exception. You can't get unemployment benefits unless you prove that you lost your job through no fault of your own, and you prove that you are actively looking for work. Unemployment insurance is a critical lifeline for people who are trying their hardest and need a little help, a recognition that Wall Street and Washington caused the financial crisis, but Main Street is still paying the price. And there's the rub. Republicans line up to protect billions in tax breaks and subsidies for big corporations with armies of lobbyists. But they can't find a way to help struggling families get back on their feet. People like Terry are hurting. They worked hard their whole lives and paid into the system. And after the worst economic crisis in generations, they're searching for jobs and scrambling to stay in the middle class. They're not looking for a handout. They're looking for a chance to rebuild their lives. They would be there for us. We should be there for them. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm reminded, even at this late hour when most of the world has moved on to other pursuits, what a great privilege it is to be with two magnificent voices and advocates for fairness and economic opportunity, Senator Warren of Massachusetts, my very good friend, Senator Booker of New Jersey, on his first occasion here on the floor. And I feel so really blessed and fortunate and privileged to be here with them. And at any moment on this floor, in this body, but particularly as we face this great challenge ahead, how to preserve and enhance our middle class in America, how to make sure that America fulfills its great promise that Senator Booker evoked so eloquently, going back to the days of George Washington, and now with great leaders facing many of the same kinds of basic questions about whether we can provide that opportunity going forward, whether we are equal to the task in an increasingly complex society. Just today, in the New York Times, a very profoundly telling story about markets losing middle-class consumers. Only the high-end and the low-end retailers able to find markets for their products because our middle class is dwindling, squeezed by the vice of an increasingly desperate situation. And how desperate it is for people who are depending now on unemployment insurance as they see the deadlines for them approaching. And they know that they will lose roofs over their heads, meals on their tables, families that they are struggling to keep together. As Senator Booker and Senator Warren said so well, the unfairness of the economic crisis caused by Wall Street and Washington, but visited upon mainstream America, middle-class America, Main Street America, still struggling to recover. And we know that this unemployment that we face today is deeper and more intractable than any time in our history. Long-term unemployment is larger percentage-wise than it has been at this point in previous recessions. That is a tragedy for those families, but also for our economy, because those consumers are lost to the retailers and to the mainstream small and middle-sized businesses that depend on them to grow and hire more people. In Connecticut, as of last month, almost half of all the individuals who suffered a job loss, 43.6%, were unable to find work for 6 months or more. That's more than 60,000 people. And those numbers don't tell the stories. They are not the voices and faces that I have seen who are depending on a meager $300 a week and who have lost even that amount. Rosa Dicker, who has deep knowledge of health care reform from her previous work and has received only 3 callback interviews out of 500 jobs that she has sought. And her job search has lasted almost a year. Michael Kubeka, who went back to get his MBA after years of experience in insurance and publishing, and again, repeatedly turned away for employment. Alicia Nesbitt, proud to have been employed continuously from the age of 16 decades ago, but recently found herself applying for food stamps. And then, of course, there's Catherine Hackett of Moodus, Connecticut, who joined the President recently to speak out about the need for extending these benefits. Catherine's family has sacrificed greatly for this nation because she has not 1, but 2 children serving in our military. And yet, because of Congress's inaction, Catherine is struggling to pay for food and heating bills during her job search. There are good guys out there helping to find jobs for people. Capital Workforce Partners has done tremendous work, and I met with them. I've met with other job creators as well as job seekers around Connecticut, and sometimes those job searches actually succeed because people are able to sustain their lives and continue to search for work. Erin London, one of the constituents whom I met as I've gone around the state, has found work after 10 months of unemployment. And she writes, "I could not be happier. I just love my new job. It is everything I was looking for." She is not a person who wanted to be without work. She is not a person who sought to be unemployed for 10 months. None of these people are. None of the people on long-term unemployment insurance want to be without work. And she wrote to me, it can take up to 3 months to get an interview. Then, if you have to follow up, it could be another month. So I do not think it is reasonable to offer only 6 months of unemployment benefits. That pretty much says it. Now, I want to emphasize one aspect of this problem that I think is absolutely unconscionable for this nation to tolerate, and that is the high unemployment rates among our veterans. This situation for post-9/11 veterans is beyond comprehension and beyond accepting. The male post-9/11 veterans, in particular, face rates of 8.6%, almost 2 points above the national average. And many of these veterans have been out of work for more than 6 months. Long-term unemployment among our veterans is a scourge that this Congress has an obligation to address. They left good-paying jobs, many of them. They came back to a nation that said it was grateful. And now they find no jobs and no unemployment insurance to keep roofs over their heads and food on their tables. That's why I've introduced the Bow to Hire Heroes Act that would extend a key tax credit to incentivize companies to hire veterans. This credit expired last year, but veteran unemployment remains a serious problem, and I urge the Congress again to pass it. I've been joined by Senator Begich and Senator Udall in writing to the Finance Committee to urge it to approve this measure so that we can bring it to the floor. And I want to thank AMVETS for its support as well on a measure that is unfortunately increasingly important, and that is to ban discrimination against veterans in both employment and housing. Believe it or not, this phenomenon occurs. Most would find it incredible. and yet a measure is necessary to ban discrimination against men and women who've served in uniform, who've served and sacrificed, who have given to this nation. Discrimination, unfortunately, is also a fact of life against the long-term unemployed. And I have proposed again and reintroduced the Fair Employment Opportunity Act, which would prohibit discrimination on the basis of employment status. Discrimination has been established by various studies, researchers at Northeastern University, similar studies involving academics at Yale, the University of Chicago, and the University of Toronto have found that long-term unemployed, the longer they have been unemployed, are much more likely to be victims of discrimination. And I want to thank 7 co-sponsors on this bill, Senators Markey, Gillibrand, Sanders, Shaheen, Murphy, Menendez, and Brown, and I urge other colleagues to support it as well. Finally, I want to thank again Senator Booker. He honors not only his own long history of public service, but also the memory of our late colleague, our extraordinary and esteemed colleague, and my wonderful mentor and friend, Frank Lautenberg. He joins the ranks of others in the Senate who are fighting for the needs of the economically disadvantaged. People, as he said so well, who play by the rules. They believe in this country, its ideals, its goals, and they want to serve it and give back and contribute. This nation depends on a covenant. It is the covenant that each of our generations leaves the country better for the one that follows. Not only that the country is better for the next generation, but that each of our generations on our watch pledge to do better. That is the reason that we need to extend unemployment insurance. Without it, we will be a lesser nation, not just economically, but in fairness and morality as well. I thank Senator Booker for reminding us of that fundamental fact about our nation, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
I just would like to briefly say thank you to my fellow senators who took time not only to come and listen to my maiden speech, but especially those who also